the one I showed you, and that is the king of the neighboring, he was called Omukama, of the neighboring empire. It was actually an empire of about 4,000 years old, they say. The one on this side had resisted the British army for about 9 years. The one on this side resisted for about 5 years. They were literally caught on the battlefield together because they had formed a united front. The gentleman standing behind them is their guard, because that is after they had been captured and they were expelled from what is now Uganda, and they were taken as prisoners to the Seychelles Islands, which became a very common thing. A number of relatives, even my own family, every time you were a problem for the British, they would throw you on the Seychelles Islands. Even kings from Ghana and other places were taken to the Seychelles. So that's a photo of them in captivity. And that is the end of that thing, because immediately they did that, the British then did a number of things, which was one, to seize all the land in Buganda and divide it among the people who had supported them. Two, they kidnapped the young son of that Kabaka and put him on the throne, which was illegal because the Kabaka was still alive. And three, they gave the churches a lot of land. Basically, to borrow the point that I think Professor Makakis made, they privatized the land in Buganda. And this has become the biggest problem in our history now. There was only one, the people who accepted the land divided into two. Many of the appointed chiefs and government functionaries under the previous Kabaka accepted to work with the British. All the Bataka refused. All the traditional clan heads refused, because they said, as the Bataka, we are actually the owners of the land, because all land in Buganda was supposed to belong to the clans. But there was one appointed chief who was also a Umutaka who refused to sign. And he said that I can't do that. Those are his actual words, translated from, he said it in Biyaoromo, and then we translated it into English. And that man was then, he started the anti-colonial movement, called the Bataka movement, demanding that the land should be returned to the owners and the king should be brought back. Him and his friend were arrested and taken to what is now northern Uganda, and he was held in prison until he died. His friend went on hunger strike immediately, but he was just held there until he died. He's actually my mother's grandfather, but this, for some reason, is a very big family secret. My mother never wants to talk about it. I don't know why. Well, I think I know why. So anyway, that is our government building. When the federal system between 1962 and 1966 was crushed, this was our government offices, and our parliament hall is inside there, our native parliament. The Obote's government seized it and turned it into the Ministry of Defense headquarters. Then they turned the King's Palace, which is 1 mile away directly opposite this one, into the main army barracks. And then when Amin took power, he promised to hand these things back, then he didn't. Then when the civil war took place and Amin fell, Obote came back and ignored the problem. Then when Obote fell, because of partly President Yoweri Museveni's fighting, Yoweri Museveni's war was fought in Buganda based on the promise that he's going to return the federal system. Now, he didn't disappoint us in this sense. He remained a real politician and he broke his promise. So when he took power, he said, I don't remember agreeing to any of these things. And that is the political tension we have in Uganda up to today, one of the primary causes. Because Obote seized all the land. You see, Uganda is made up of about 18,000 square miles, Buganda. It's actually bigger than Rwanda, the space that we come from. But we are not many, we are about maybe 10 million people. But the land that had been privatized remained in private hands, the churches, etc. And the land that had been taken by the British, the 9,000 square miles, the British had actually handed it back to Buganda at independence. Then when Federation was crushed in 1966, Obote seized this and said, this is government land. And all the governments since, including the one we have today, don't want to talk about it. So our critical issues are therefore the ownership and settlement of land, because half of the kingdom is in government hands, the land mass, the other half is in private hands. And what they are doing is bringing a lot of settlers from all over the country to live in Buganda. which we don't mind for a very important reason, that the word Buganda, you see, we actually called Abaganda, that's who we are. But the word Ganda has so many different meanings in our language. It means sibling of the same gender. It means a bundle, if you get like firewood and tie it in a bundle. That is called Omuganda, you see, and it is also the name of the country. So, our philosophy as people has always been to bring people together and try to join them and build one nation. Because we started with 6 clans in the very beginning. Now we had up to 53. As long as you respect the customs and the institutions, you're welcome. But since the destruction of federation, a new tradition of settling is coming in, where people come and disrespect the native customs and say, we are not interested, but the Republican modern constitution gives us the right to come and buy land and settle here, and we don't have to pay any attention to your institutions. I'll talk briefly about why that is a problem. Now, I talked about the master plan. In an attempt to defeat federation, I'd already mentioned the master plan. I won't go back onto that one. Only to say that because of the collapse of the rural economy, Uganda's current government was the first government to completely embrace all the neoliberal programs of privatization, liberalization, etc., etc. And it has really disorganized the country, especially the agricultural sector. Up to 70 to 80% of the population of Uganda used to be agriculturalists. This regime, on the advice of the World Bank, I met a very nice gentleman working from the World Bank yesterday at the dinner. I don't know if he's here, but if you're here, I don't mean you, sir. I mean the other people you work with, but for you, you're okay. Okay, so what they did was that they destroyed the agricultural sector by removing the cooperative system, which was one of the earliest forms of economic resistance to the colonial economy, which became an issue of national independence and were legitimized after independence. President Museveni removes them, the rural economy collapses, and everybody starts migrating. Much as we have all these districts, it's only about 5 districts in Uganda, and I'm not lying, Kampala and about 4 or 5 of the neighboring districts are currently producing about 60 to 70% of the country's entire GDP. You can imagine the kind of imbalance that that creates. So it's logical for anyone, especially a young person who's starting their life, to go and try their life there. So it has created a huge demand for land, so that the native people cannot afford to buy land in their own territory, because a lot of people in government stealing money and hiding it in buying land, but also other people are migrating to the area and demanding land. So this is what has created all sorts of dislocations, and now a growing huge export market. A lot of young people are being exported to the Middle East to basically become slaves. So Museveni's response to the demand for federation was to create this mess here. He called it decentralization, because Uganda today has 127 different districts. I should tell you that every district in Uganda produces 3 MPs. There's the woman MP, district MP, then there are historically 2 constituencies. Okay, and then it must have a district council, and so it's very expensive to create a district. Some of these districts have populations of 200,000 people, because the total population of Uganda is not yet 40 million people. But you have divided them up into 127 districts. If you look at the part that is Buganda, it was simply to cut up all the traditional historical districts that we had natively. Okay? Incidentally, this idea was given to the government on advice from Professor Mahmoud Mamdani about 15 years ago. So I'd actually been waiting for him for a long time. And I think finally I got him. These are just photos I can jump to. That's my brother under arrest. Him and I started a newspaper when the government had shut down our local language radio station belonging to the kingdom. That was our newspaper. Then, where I showed you that big building, many historical sites exist there for the Buganda kingdom. So the government went on a very determined program to rig the MP's election to make sure a ruling party person, an Asian gentleman called Singh, would take the seat against a journalist who was very popular and worked for our paper. So my brother got very involved in that. The battle lasted a year. This is him fighting with the police again. That is when he was protesting against, they were stealing the votes during the recount. And the magistrate ordered them to stop counting the votes because they were just stealing. And the police ignored the magistrate, and then they threw everybody out. So that was my brother there. Then this is other attacks on us. You know that building I showed you? What I said was the original palace, like a big hut? It's actually a UNESCO site of cultural significance. In 2010, it mysteriously caught fire. And this is what happened. And we all had to go there. And then there was 2 days of rioting. And then the president insisted on pretending he's concerned and going to visit it on the 3rd day. And the protesters were telling him to go away, and he just ordered his bodyguards to shoot a lot of people. I didn't want to bring you photos of dead bodies because I'm a visitor here, but I want to tell you that I'm trying to show you that there have been a lot of contestations. That is another issue of our paper. Now, the critical question is what is driving this? But let me go back a bit. You see, this question of federation is very important because the same game is being played, whereby you pretend you're giving federation. I've shown you that map because you're saying, well, if you want federation, it means you want more local representation. So let me give you decentralization, and you create 127 unviable districts. You see, in my language, we have a proverb that ekibawo kimala nanti enyindo y'enkoko kyekyenye. Now, I think you can all agree with me that the ugliest part of a chicken is its head. And many people will not eat the head of a chicken. Now, there's a mentality, an attitude that a human being can have of saying, you know, I will work with whatever is there, I don't mind, you know. Echibao, whatever is there, chimala, is enough, you see. Now we say, in response to this proverb, the way it ends, is that, you see, that mentality is how a chicken's head ended up also being its nose ended up also being its forehead, you see, because the chicken didn't care. It said whatever is there will work. As a result, in its being created, its nose is also its forehead, and it is a very ugly bird, like decentralization. So we are insisting that no, the right thing must be done because there is something deeper than simply symbolism and culture. And this is what I want to talk about because I think I see something similar here. I don't know how aware you are that the average American eats about 95 kilograms of meat in 1 year. Did you know that? The average American citizen. 95 kilograms of meat in 1 year. And according to the United States Department of Agriculture, beef and pork production is going to grow significantly over the next decade, driven by lower feed costs and healthy demand. The average American is therefore expected to go up to 219 pounds of meat a year. The question is this: where are these animals going to be fed from? Okay? Because Americans must eat. Okay? Now, you see, as we speak today, 125,000 cattle are slaughtered in a week in the United States, and 35 million chickens also. What has happened since the 2008 crash is that there has been a global demand. Everything else crashed, but the global demand for food remained high. The challenge was to get cheaper and cheaper supplies of food. Because if you count the 3 main markets for importing food, you have China with 1 billion people, half of whom maybe eat imported food. You have the European Union with 500 million people. And you have the United States with maybe 400 million people, I'm not sure. Most of these people live in cities and do not grow their own food. And in fact, most of what is sold and eaten in America is, technically speaking, not food. Okay? It is a combination of about 5 things. You know, fats, carbohydrates, and some grains and whatever. It's not healthy food. And those of you who live in America, stop eating it. It's not good for you. Okay, now, the plan is very simple. Let me put it in very simple language. Africa has to be turned into a huge farm for the global corporations. The 5 major commodities that are sold globally as food or foodstuffs are rice, soya, wheat, sugar, corn, and I can never remember the last one. But it's there. I'll remember it in a minute. Now, these foods have to be grown at cheaper and cheaper prices. The war in South Sudan for a long time was being driven by Sudanese oligarchs in Khartoum who exported wheat to Europe, and they're very wealthy people. And the method was simple. You go somewhere fertile, like the lower part of the Nuba Mountains, and come with a big machine and cultivate hectares and hectares and hectares of land and grow the wheat and harvest it and export it. This is what was happening. There's only one problem with this model, that there are people living on that land. Who are those people? There are people like the Oromo, people like the Buganda, people like the Dinka. So the solution for them is simple. Let's get you out of the way. And you do this by, first of all, making a political argument to say you people don't actually exist. You are imagining your existence. Okay? And then the second argument is political and economic. That, okay, even if you exist, for the sake of development, move. Come and live in the cities and surrender your land for development. And then the third argument is military. They just use violence and literally commit acts of genocide. This is what is happening all over the Great Lakes region between the 2 rift valleys throughout the Nile Basin. Because your problem is that you have 2 things that the world needs. You have huge areas of very fertile land, and you live near all the freshwater supplies on the continent of Africa. You may not know that Uganda sits at the center of a system of lakes. There is no lake more than 1,000 kilometers far away from Uganda on the whole continent except in West Africa. So the historical mission that was started by those missionaries has been to get us out of the way. And we have been resisting by saying that, you know, we have the right to exist. That is number 1. Number 2, your system that you want to bring here doesn't work anyway. Again, I don't know, those of you who might live in the United States and such places, but actually capitalism died. Okay? I'm the one now who has to make the death announcement because the owners of capitalism have not been saying. The ones who created that, they're pretending that the thing is working. Actually, it's dead. And it is not coming back to life. You take my word for it. Okay? Now, the problem with the European mentality and with capitalists is that when they have a problem, they don't admit they have a problem. They simply try harder. So the only way to make capitalism appear to work is to start getting things virtually for free. And you do that by doing free farming in Africa, by driving the peasants away. They want us all to go and work in the Middle East or be crowded in the slums in the cities. That's what those urban master plans are about. Because in that small space you can put 40 million people. How they survive there is their business. But the point is the land is now free. Then you push away the wild animals by fencing them off, and you start farming. I know that up to 4 million acres was given by a certain year here in Oromo. But I don't know how many more they're planning to give away. But that is what Museveni is doing with the 9,000 square miles that he has refused to return to us. He keeps calling so-called foreign investors and saying, come and grow what you want, I'll give you concessions and so on and so forth. So let me not continue depressing with definitions of food. Yes, they need us to vacate the land. So the way forward is we need to restore ourselves, restorativity. Not just territory on the buildings, but the philosophies, the practical knowledge and the spiritual values that can take us beyond this phase of human activity. Okay? We lived for 500 years with a Judeo-Christian or white definition of what is human progress. Its highest point was capitalism. It tried to rise higher than capitalism with so-called socialism and communism. That didn't work because it is rooted in the same systems that diverted from the thinking of people like Thoth. And I don't know, let me not get into Egyptian mythology right now. But the point is, that is over. Now what comes next? and the knowledge of what comes next, where will that knowledge come from? European values which have been globalized cannot address the problem that the Europeans have created globally. Okay? But we must solve these problems of global warming, of human starvation, of human loneliness, mental health, and so on. Where are the knowledge systems and spiritual systems going to come from? They're going to come from here in Africa, especially from places like Oromia. Okay? And this is why we must do this work. Now, a principal thing about that is language. I've covered what this talk was about. You need to know that your problem, therefore, exists all over post-colonial Africa. There's no country you can mention virtually in what is called sub-Saharan Africa where the immediate post-independence federation arrangements were not broken in the interests of the new independence leaders calling themselves Pan-Africanists working for global capital. You might not know that Mombasa and Kenya were a federation. The whole coast of Kenya was not part of Kenya at independence. It was a federation. You might not know that in Zambia there was a kingdom called Barotse that was federated with the central government. You might not know that the same thing was in Tanzania, in the southern part, the people who have their headquarters in Mozambique. You might not know you had the same problem in Angola. Now, what our post-colonial leaders did was to disguise this as African unity and Pan-Africanism and say, you see, these things are backward and you are dividing the population, so we're getting rid of them. What the English African historian Basil Davidson called the complete flattening of the ethnic landscape. They now want to make you citizens by force, okay? And just say that you are now all equal and the same and no one is entitled to anywhere special. So don't tell us about sacred sites or anything like that. If we tell you to move, you move for the sake of development. This happened all over sub-Saharan Africa. What makes people like Oromo and Buganda unique is that you stood your ground. You simply refused to give up. You just found a way to continue existing, practicing your culture, speaking your language, and resisting the state. That's what makes you in particular unique. We also did the same thing, because you see the calculation was very simple, and I want to wind up very quickly. When independence was coming, as Bonnie was saying, there was a contestation. I think Bonnie said that a bit, and also Professor Makakis, between these newly invented human beings who came out of the mission schools, those African boys you saw kneeling in front of the white priest. These became the people who were active in the colony. They were educated. They were given low government jobs and so on. Some of them became politicians. There was that group. And then there were still the native institutions. And the native institutions were saying to the British, in our case, in Kenya, in Ghana, and Uganda, that we hear you want to go. We hear you want to give independence. But we don't see you. Because you see, when you invaded us, you made us sign treaties at gunpoint, accepting that now we have become colonies. So now, if you are going, it means that you want to break that treaty. You want to withdraw from the treaty you imposed on us. So the logical thing would be to hand power back to the one you took it from. I think you can agree. It's like if you're renting a house. You see? The day you decide to leave your landlord's house, you won't go and give the keys to the neighbor or to somebody you met on the street. You have to call the landlord and say, you know, I'm going. Here's your house back. So the native leaders were asking, why are you negotiating with people we don't know, when you know that you signed these things with our ancestors? The Maasai wrote letters about this. Not the Kikuyu so much. Buganda had huge fights about this until our Kabaka was deported and imprisoned in England. And then we took the British government to court and he was brought back to court in England. We went to sent lawyers and they argued in the High Court that this is a violation of the colonial treaty. And they had to bring him back. And the governor was sacked. So all sorts of fights have been taking place. So the argument is that the owners never disappeared. The owners are still here with their institutions. That is who you have to deal with. Now, the modern elites who are controlling the European planted states don't want to have this argument because they are leveraging their control of the state to make themselves rich. And even at an individual level, I want to be very clear on this question of tribalism. Tribalism is not what we are doing, okay? Tribalism is actually an elite practice where elites use it to leverage personal concessions from the center by pretending to represent the mass. That is tribalism. What we are practicing is ethnic nationalism. That is what the mass practices. The elite practice what is called tribalism. You see? So when they tell you that you're being a tribalist, you say that no, that is what the elite are doing. For us, we are saying we don't want concessions from the center. If anything, we want the center to even go away. Okay? Because we were governing ourselves before this center was invented, and we can govern ourselves after it. So, with the capitalism's crisis at that level, okay, I thought you were coming with a piece of paper. We have to do certain things. We have to understand ourselves better. And among our intellectual studies and investigations, we have to start thinking about things we have not been thinking about. There have been some wonderful presentations about history here, and Bonnie has unleashed a lot of information that made me feel like maybe that I should just go back home. But I said I will try and follow such amazing speakers and presentations. The first thing is to ask, who are we as African people? Because I didn't meet an Oromo person until I was an adult. But I was reading some papers, I think Anissa and Mr. Anissa, sorry. I had a paper they wrote about the time concept among the Oromo people, called Rounds of Time, which was sent to me. And I found it very disturbing because, you see, in my language, the word for the past and the word for the future is the same word. You see? And there's even a proverb around that, because even the word for returning, to come back, is the same word as the past and as the future. And we have not had space to examine why these things are. But my question is, why would we have a concept of time that is so similar, yet we are being told that we are very different people from one another? You see, are these things random? You see? Because the word in my language for the past, the distant past, is da. Edda. You say da. That's past. And the word for the far future is da. You say that it will happen again in the future. You say da. It will come a lot later. It's very hard to explain in English because it's the same word. So we even have a proverb, because it's also the word to return. We have a proverb that says, what you took or committed or ate a long time ago will come back a long time later. You see? And in our language we say, okaryadda kadadda. That's what we say in my language. So when I read this paper, I became quite confused and disturbed, and I had to read some more. What I did is I went to one of the inspirations for our university. The battery is about to die here, but I will struggle on. Sheikh Anta Diop. He stated that the history of black Africa will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians dare to connect it with the history of Egypt. You see? There have been other studies about this problem. And there was a West Indian theoretician. He went and lived for 15 years in Africa doing research until he went blind. It was called Chancellor Williams. And he discovered that when he talked to the native communities of West Africa, they all have these migration myths that say they came from the East. And when you come among the native communities of Southern Africa, including us, we all have migration myths that say we came from the North or the Northeast. And why is that? You see? And there are many, many things I see and hear that I can see that actually we are very recent arrivals from here, or maybe you are very recent arrivals from there, but we all came from somewhere else. And Chancellor Williams theorizes that after the final collapse of ancient Egypt, there was a 2,000-year period of confusion and scattering, where people lost things and forgot things and learnt new things. And that is what birthed all these huge divergences in language and technological skills and other things. But you cannot accept these ideas if you do not accept that ancient Egypt was a black African civilization. And that the people of this region in particular supplied many of the dynasties for that civilization for a long time. If you don't accept that, you can't accept the rest. But he asked the question, he says that study the migrations to understand all these things. Why do you all have histories of migrations? Why do I? You see? Because you see, if we are to fight this thing, be very, very clear, my friends. The Chinese empire, the European empire, and the American empire have to come here and control the resources here directly. They are now at a point of crisis where they have no choice but to do this. The Chinese are doing it in a very particular way through biological settler colonialism. I think you know what I'm talking about. Okay? You might not have it here, but if you go to Zambia, the Chinese now have separate police stations for themselves. Do you know this? I'm not lying. I didn't get the picture, but I have newspapers from Zambia. Also in Zimbabwe. The national newspaper of Zambia has 3 pages which are printed in the Chinese language for the Chinese people. Now, we all like people and we all like to be together, but it's that question I told you about in Buganda. We always say anyone can migrate and settle here as long as they respect our native institutions and our customs and our laws. Okay? These people don't want to do that. They are coming to take over. Okay? You may not know that all of South Asia, from Yemen all the way up to the Philippines, most of the indigenous people there were as black as you and as me. But they were simply bred out of existence by Asian colonization, because Asian colonization uses a different form of forced intermarriage, whereas Europeans just come and kill everybody. Okay? Which, when you think about it, is more efficient, but you know how Europeans work. You know, they believe in efficiency. So, what I want us to therefore do is to focus very briefly on the question of language. I consulted one of my mentors, the writer called Ngugi wa Thiong'o, whom some of you may know, and he asked me to tell you that African languages are the key to the revival and flowering of knowledge. Languages are the primary or natural hard drive, and we want to draw from and build on the information, memories, and dreams already in the hard drive and connect to other languages and cultures. Colonialism trained us to throw away or disconnect with the primary hard drive. Secure the Base is the title of one of my books, and I have no copyright on these ideas. He asked me to tell you this. Okay, so I'll leave that with you, that the focus, of course, is on language. So what can we do by way of actions? We need to begin movements and coalitions of native Africans. Okay? We need to do that. For example, we need to make joint demands that we should all go and speak at the African Union. Yes. Yes, I'm about to finish. This is the last page, actually. I promise it's the last page. So, we need to show the world and our elites and our European planted states that we are still here, and we are still many, and we are organized. So it should not be that the Oromo problem is a problem for the government here, and the Buganda problem is a problem for the government in Kampala, and the Maasai problem is a problem for the government in Nairobi. Okay? We need to become a problem for the African Union together. Okay? We need to bring grassroots movements to the center of all these things. Okay? One of the things that our Kabaka has done is to indigenize and hand over power to younger and younger people within Buganda and tell them, I lived in exile for a long time, now it is for you to do something. And let them learn, let them make the mistakes and support and advise them. But let the young people take over and drive the next phase. We have done our work as old people. I'm also very old, by the way. I'm nearly 60 years old, you know. So we have done our work. Let us now hand over to the young people and let them take over and do the work. Our job is to train them. Okay? So my first proposal is for native diplomatic relations. if I could be introduced to the people who could allow me to take a message back to the Kabaka of Buganda, that I was here and I talked, and I think our issue was understood. And finally, stop being apologetic. You people are very polite, and this is a problem. Stop being apologetic and stop lamenting. My final point, you see, in my language there's one small proverb. You know, there are people who sometimes have a problem with the back. You are born and your back is called a hunchback or a humpback. In my language, we say that if by some circumstance you find yourself sharing a bed with a person with that condition, you have two choices. Either you can get the courage to speak directly and create a discussion around the issue, or you sleep without your share of the blanket. Okay? You see? That is up to you. If you don't have the capacity to name the problem as it is and say we need to discuss and solve this problem, accept that you won't have your share of the blanket. So let us stop being apologetic. We were here first, okay? We have the best ideas for the future, okay? And we should stop internalizing victimhood. Let us stop lamenting. Let us make actions to make the people who have been creating a problem for us, okay, give us our share of the blanket now. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for listening to me.